Hi everyone! Thanks for joining me again on another weekly update on my 5 vermicomposting systems. I'm starting with my regular totes as usual, and this is just the basic regular tote with shredded cardboard and cocoa core start. In this particular bin, the castings are still holding moisture. You can see here where it's kind of clumpy and it's more like a brownie um, consistency versus like a more cookie like crumble to it. So I'm still focusing on the water retention now that it's summer. I'm going to cut back on the size of the feeding in this bin for a week, just one piece of watermelon rind and a bit of bell pepper, and set this up for the next week. I believe the next week I'm going to add additional cardboard. I just don't want to the bin off balance by adding too much of any material at one time. Moving over to my second regular tote bin, this is the one that I'm doing as a trash can style. And last week I mixed all the material together. So this week I'm going back to just adding in pieces of cardboard and food as a pocket feeding style on this bin. I've never done trash can style feeding before, so it's not going the same as the regular tote where if I see that the castings are finished, I just add cardboard and continue the process. I'm not sure how and when to harvest this one because it's getting pretty heavy in comparison to the regular tote. The castings are a bit wetter. As you can see, they're really dark brown in the areas that the bubble wrap wasn't reaching to. But overall, the worms in here are enjoying themselves. They're doing really well. I find that they are always where I fed the previous week. So I'm going to let this go for a little bit and see what happens. But this bin is also fed up for the week. And then just as a little note for anyone joining me new, the white powder is grit. The grit that I use is a mixture of diatomaceous earth, neem cake, and eggshells. So in my first Vermi Bag tote, I had a huge bundle of worms there. They're hanging out where there's food. In the Vermi Bag totes, unlike the regular totes, these tend to be drier. So each week I find I do have to add water to these bin because the additional moisture evaporates out very quickly because the material lends to it. I'm also cutting back on the size of the feeding in this bin, so I want to see how the worms do with just a few pieces of food, whether I find that they're more dispersed for next week. But this bin is also set up and the overall health of the worms looks really good as well. And my last tote style is the tote that was just recently sifted for all of the worms and restarted. I didn't really do a full traditional harvesting cycle with this one. And I have to say, these castings are very wet. The material inside is super wet, and that's rare for a Vermi Bag tote to be as wet as this one was, and it might be because I did have larger pieces of cardboard in it. So I didn't give it large pieces of fruit like the watermelon. I just gave some cantaloupe rind and set this up. We'll see how it looks next week. But again, the worms were happy with the conditions. This is just my personal choice in keeping it drier. So last week, if you remember, I had a ton of beetles at the top of the Vermi Bag Mini, and this week I only had a few. So putting all of that shredded cardboard on the top and then putting my grit on the top of it with the diatomaceous earth was successful in knocking back the numbers. I know I'm never going to get rid of the beetles, and again, I am stumped as to why it's just the Vermi Bag Mini that has the beetles, but I'm back down to a number of beetles that I can work with. This week for the feeding, I'm going to wet down the material first because the material at the top was dry since I did put a huge clumping of cardboard to suppress the beetles. So I wet it down and then I'm giving this a feeding of food that does have quite a bit of moisture. So I'm giving it the larger watermelon rind and still some cantaloupe skins, but things that will have moisture that will give it back into or release it into the cardboard so that it's not so dry up there and the worms are encouraged to migrate to the top again. By putting all that shredded material on there, I feel like the worms went back down in the bin. There's not a lot of them towards the top, and with the flow through systems, you really do want to keep them at the top. But otherwise, the health of the worms look really good. And that's my update for the week. I really do appreciate if you've stuck with me to the very end. And if you enjoy the content, please like and subscribe. It does help the channel. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.